Our journey starts in the early 20th century in the streets of New York City. This city echoed with tenement houses, factories, and hope. A young man grew to prominence. Born to immigrant parents on the Lower East Side, Al Smith, who never finished high school, was able to rise to the top of New York politics. In 1919, Al Smith officially became the governor of New York City and transformed the role of government in everyday life. While Smith was governor of New York from 1919 to the 1920s, he pushed for labor protections, better housing, and public health programs. And even after the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, he helped pass safety regulations to make America safe. In 1928, Al Smith made history when he became the first Catholic major party presidential nominee for the Democratic Party. Despite Smith losing in the election of 1928, he forever changed the Democratic Party, shifting it towards the minorities, and many of his reforms inspired in Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal. So while Smith didn't win the presidency, he won something much larger as a whole, a new, more inclusive vision of America.
Born in a small Quaker town in Iowa in 1874, Herbert Hoover's life began with hardship. Orphaned by the age of 9, he moved west to Oregon, but his determination never wavered. In 1891, he entered Stanford University as part of its very first class, earning a degree in geology and setting out to build a career that would take him around the world. As a mining engineer, Hoover became a self-made millionaire, but it wasn't his wealth that defined him, it was his compassion. During World War I, he led the Commission for Relief in Belgium, feeding millions trapped in occupied Europe. Known as the Great Humanitarian, he later headed U.S. food relief efforts, inspiring the nation with the slogan, "Food will win the war." By the 1920s, Hoover served as Secretary of Commerce, modernizing industries, promoting aviation, and helping launch massive public works like the Hoover Dam. His reputation for efficiency and optimism carried him to the White House in 1928. But just months after taking office, the stock market crashed. The Great Depression began, and Hoover's belief in limited government made recovery slow and painful. His refusal to expand federal aid earned criticism, and the shanty towns of the era became known as Hoovervilles. Yet, after leaving office, Hoover dedicated the rest of his long life to rebuilding trust in government. Through the Hoover Commission, he streamlined federal operations and restored his reputation as a tireless public servant. Herbert Hoover remains a complex figure, a man of deep humanitarian vision and technical brilliance, whose presidency marks the turning point between old American individualism and the new age of federal responsibility.
FDR was born in 1882 and he began his political journey as a New York State Senator. He later served as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy under President Woodrow Wilson. Though he was struck by polio and paralyzed from the waist down, Roosevelt's strength only grew. He was elected governor of New York in 1928, where he proved his leadership during hard times. This paved the way for his presidency in 1932. With the Great Depression crippling the nation, Roosevelt offered a bold new hope through his New Deal, a sweeping series of programs that put millions back to work, built schools, bridges, and parks. It also established Social Security to protect the vulnerable. He was re-elected in a landslide in 1936, where he faced obstacles such as a Supreme Court resistant to his reforms, the recession of 1937, and a divided Congress. Yet he pressed on, signing the Fair Labor Standards Act, setting the foundation for modern labor rights. Franklin D. Roosevelt, a leader of resilience, reform, and vision, forever changed the role of the government and the course of American history. Henry Cabot Lodge was born in Beverly, Massachusetts. He entered politics in 1880, where he rose steadily from the Massachusetts House of Representatives to the U.S. Senate, where he served for more than 30 years. Lodge was a close ally of Theodore Roosevelt. He supported a stronger Navy, civil service reform, and a firm gold standard. He believed America's strength rested on discipline, patriotism, and purpose. Lodge championed U.S. intervention in Cuba during the Spanish-American War, and later argued that the Philippines should remain under American control, convinced that a global presence was vital to national power. At home, he pushed for literacy tests and tighter immigration laws, warning that unskilled labor threatened American prosperity. His leadership in rejecting the Treaty of Versailles reshaped U.S. foreign policy for a generation. Brilliant yet abrasive, Lodge was respected for his deep knowledge and skill in Senate politics, but often disliked for his arrogance. Still, he stood as a defining voice of his time, convinced that America's destiny was to lead from strength. Henry Cabot Lodge, a scholar, statesman, and strategist, left an undeniable mark on the nation's path to power.
Born in a Wisconsin farmhouse in 1855, Robert M. La Follette grew up with strong Midwestern values of hard work, fairness, and a belief that government should serve the people, not the powerful. After graduating from the University of Wisconsin and becoming a lawyer, La Follette entered politics as a young Republican congressman, but unlike many of his peers, he refused to bow to corruption or corporate influence. When political bosses tried to control him, he fought back and launched a lifelong crusade for reform. As governor of Wisconsin from 1901 to 1906, La Follette transformed his state into a laboratory of democracy. His Wisconsin idea brought university experts into government to write evidence-based laws. He introduced direct primary, fairer taxes, and regulations on railroads and corporations, proving that honest, efficient government could truly work for the people. Elected to the U.S. in 1906, Fighting Bob carried his progressive vision to the national stage, battling for workers' rights, child labor laws, and women's suffrage. He fought corporate monopolies and demanded accountability from both parties. When America entered World War I, La Follette took a lonely stand against it, arguing the war served big businesses more than democracy. Though condemned at the time, his courage and conscience later won respect. In 1924, he ran for president as the Progressive Party candidate, called for fair wages, civil liberties, and public ownership of utilities. Nearly 5 million Americans voted for him, proving that the message of equality and reform reached far beyond Wisconsin. Robert M. La Follette died in 1925, but his legacy lived on. His reforms inspired the New Deal, and his belief in honest, democratic government continues to shape American politics today.
Few voices in American history ever thundered like that of William Jennings Bryan. At the dawn of the 20th century, Bryan was already considered a national legend. His Cross of Gold speech had made him the youngest major party nominee for president, capturing the hearts of millions who saw him as the champion of the common man. William Jennings Bryan was more than a politician. He was the reform for the progressive era. He was the presidential nominee 3 times for the Democratic Party, the Secretary of State under Woodrow Wilson, and he fought for income tax reform, women's suffrage, and the 17th Amendment, reforms that became the pillars of the progressive era. He was also considered one of America's greatest communicators. Traveling the country by train, he brought politics to the people, sometimes speaking multiple times a day to thousands in a crowd. But Bryan's story also reflects the tension between progress and tradition. In 1925, at the Scopes trial, he defended the story against the teaching of evolution. For many, he represented the old values in a modern age, a symbol of America's internal struggle over faith, science, and identity. Through triumph and controversy, he left a defining, divisive legacy. Though he never really reached the White House, his ideals shaped American democracy long after his voice fell silent.
One who was known for his outdoorsy personality started his life remaining indoors due to an illness. Theodore Roosevelt was a president that made the position he held more powerful and made America feel brave. And what you gotta realize about Roosevelt was that even though he was in a comfortable position as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, he still decided to go out and serve as a Lieutenant General for the group called the Rough Riders in the Battle of San Juan during the Spanish-American War, and then thus made him the Governor of New York and eventually the Vice President. As on September 14, 1901, President William McKinley died because of an assassination, and Theodore Roosevelt became president. His policies were based on his brave personality, creating the Big Stick policy, which stated that if you speak softly and carry a big stick with you, then you will go far in life. He implemented this in his policies, such as the Roosevelt Corollary, where he made America the police force of the Caribbean, the role model for other countries, and a country not to be taken lightly. On issues such as trusts, nature, and the average work and life of the common person. And he made the Square Deal to address all of these issues with his 3 C's, and eventually became known as the Trust Buster because of how he dealt with companies that were misusing their power. Theodore Roosevelt made the role of president and the government more formidable, while impacting millions of average citizens with his progressive policies.
In an era of reform and global upheaval, one man's intellect and idealism redefined the American presidency in its entirety. Woodrow Wilson, a former Princeton professor and governor of New Jersey, entered the White House in 1913, determined to restore what he called the New Freedom. Wilson's agenda was ambitious and transformative. He created the Federal Reserve System and gave America a proper banking foundation for them to work on. He pushed the Clean Antitrust Act and officially curbed monopolies. He championed child labor and worker compensation laws and helped supported them throughout this time period. Wilson's biggest challenge was yet to come: World War I, the greatest crisis of his presidency. Reluctant to join at first, Wilson eventually led America into the war to make it safe for democracy. Though when the guns fell silent, he became a global visionary. His 14 points and a dream for a League of Nations sought out a peace based not on vengeance, but on justice and cooperation. Yet, during his presidency, Wilson was considered to be deeply controversial. His League of Nations divided Americans, and many were opposed to this, especially Henry Cabot Lodge. And his Espionage and Sedition Act during the war crushed dissent and First Amendment rights. Yet, his legacy endures that of a powerful communicator, a reformer in times of crisis, and a defining president whose vision reshaped the role of the United States in the world.
We chose to nominate Franklin Delano Roosevelt because he embodied leadership, resilience, and hope during one of America's hardest times. When the Great Depression left millions unemployed and struggling, FDR took bold action through the New Deal, reforming banks, creating jobs, and restoring faith in the government. He also guided the nation toward recovery with optimism and confidence. His ability to inspire unity and reshape the role of the government makes him not just a great president, but a symbol of strength in adversity, earning his place in our History Hall of Fame.